Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. And we are well into a discussion of a book by James Hollis. The book is titled Living Between Worlds, Finding Personal Resilience in Changing Times. I know this has been heavy stuff. I've had a few emails from folks who say they are enjoying it. I appreciate it if you've been able to stay with this. I think it's really, really worth it, even though it does take some perhaps going beyond our normal comfort zones. So I'm going to dive right in. Probably going to be doing a bit more reading. This chapter, I've read it during my quiet time in the mornings 6 or 7 times this week, and each time I get a little bit more out of it. So I'm going to let Hollis speak, and I will try to be a little more quiet than usual, and I hope it is something that resonates deeply with you and with your own spiritual journey. So he's up to chapter 6 in his book. It's titled, What is Healing? And so he's going to do a pretty in-depth look at what is it that goes on in depth psychology that calls us, where is the work, in other words? What is the work that has to be done here? So hope you enjoy it. So let me get started. He says, what is healing? And what can we do to further its work in us? If it is on each of us to further our own healing and that of the world, what is the scaffolding of nature's restorative process, and what is the intent and movement of the soul's work? What role do we have to play in all this? How can consciousness and learning assist or impede this process? My last book, Living an Examined Life, Wisdom for the Second Half of the Journey, which I recommend highly, laid out 21 tasks, the addressing of which will lead to a richer, more satisfying life. It was and remains my contention that those tasks, assignments, summonses are at work within us, whether we know it or not. Our consciousness can aid them, just as our flight from thoughtfulness around these matters can undermine them. Among those 21 tasks were 3 critical assignments for healing. 1. Recovering personal authority. We all have personal authority at the beginning. It is called instinct. Our bodies know what is right for it. Our souls know as well. But our adaptations so often split us off from the primal knowing and lead us to distorting life strategies. Any choice that arises out of deferred personal authority will likely prove wrong for us in time. He's saying there that we come equipped to do this work. And the big book talks about this. We have instincts, but they've gone astray. We've looked for them to do more than they were intended to do, or we've shied away from expressing them. So the inner work is what has to be done, and this is going to demand some personal authority from us. He'll go deeper into that. Assembling a mature spirituality, number 2. Our spirituality is as mature as our character is mature. What role does fear management play in the deformation of our spiritual life? Does our spirituality preserve the mystery of the mystery? That second mystery is a capital M. Or is it a subtle attempt to create images and practices that ratify our complexes, our stuck parts, and keep them reassured? Does our spirituality make us uncomfortable? Uncomfortable enough to require that we grow up and grow onward? Or does it perpetuate the sleep of childhood? Spirituality plays a huge role in recovery, and it's not, a march towards holiness. It's a march towards wholeness, doing the work that never got done, that got sidelined. I mean, that's to me what spirituality is about. Being rightly related to our concept of God, our concept of my role that life is asking of me, and then how I'm getting along with other people. So it's relational, very much relational. Third one is choosing meaning over happiness, and we've kind of dealt with that in the last episode. So I'm going to move on. These are but 3 of the tasks identified from a long list of accountabilities. Such accountability means that we assume partnership in our mental, physical, and psychological well-being. A sense of the rightness of our life doesn't just happen to us. We are partners in the ongoing conversation that calls us to show up and be responsible. It's one of the things of Jungian psychology is that there's a dialogue going on, voices in our heads, voices that are coming from our unconscious mind. And I think Jung would agree with this, voices that are coming from our soul and from the beyond that is within, our God image, if you will, that it can talk to us as well. And that, to me, that's why two-way prayer is so foundational to really doing 12-step recovery. One of the things I observe in the contemporary world is an increasing awareness that something is not right. We have generally the living conditions for which our ancestors longed, and yet, as a culture, we are swimming in malaise. More and more folks are tumbling to the notion that they are going to have to decide what their lives serve, how they can gain a sense of purpose, find emotional satisfaction from their labors, and value something more than power, wealth, and security. And I think this is what happens he's going to talk about later in the second half of life. Is this all there is? It's when the soul calls us to account, and it says to us, it's not getting its needs met. A lot of people who are attracted to this podcast are people who are a little more along the road to recovery, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, and they want to go deeper. And there are also people who are coming back, and it helps them go deeper this second time around. So more and more people believe that they have to be fearless in their choice of life that makes sense to them, rather than fit in, please others, or serve cultural expectations. Recently, I was talking to a former student who left his very high-paying job in a financial corporation in order to retrain as a social worker. He said, I told him at the time of that decision that he would pay a price either way, but the price of regret would be far higher than the price of tuition. He is now in the work of sitting hour by hour with people in distress, and he would not trade it for the world. He took that risk, leaped into his own abyss, and found that something within rose to support him, carried him through, and rewarded him in a new way. Big Book is so full of truth, but if you really start doing this deeper work, the truths are magnified. We stood at the turning point. We asked his care with complete abandon. All right? I mean, this is a life-changing program that we are getting ourselves into. For any of us to find that purpose, to be served by the resilient powers of nature, we have to heal. We were close to the source as children, but then day after day, those necessary adaptations began the long exile from our psychological homes. Healing will involve returning to ourselves, the selves equipped from the beginning by divinity or nature, replete with resilience, desire, and nature's resources of strength and endurance. After all, nature wishes us to survive, and more than survive. It wishes us to serve being, capital B, by becoming that which is wishing expression through us. So he's saying here that we were close to it as children. We had the beginnings of it. And then as life came along, we got diverted. We became less than ourselves. We became who the world wanted us to be, what life was expecting of us through our culture, through our families, through our friends. And somehow along the way, we got lost. If recovery is going to be meaningful, then it has to be that we're going back and redoing some of the work that got lost, that we can become the person we were intended to be. He says, as I reflect on the healing process, I think of the following 7 general principles. Some are obvious, others less so. They are as follows. And there's a progression to these that I noticed as I was kind of meditating on them. So see if you can't follow those yourself. Number 1, we are equipped by nature to survive, live our journey, and become. Admittedly, he says, this particular animal, the human, is the most complex and needs the longest length of protection before it is able to manage on its own. Some animals arrive and minutes later are fending for themselves. We all forget, however, that nature brings us here with the requisite resources to survive. Yet, as we all know, nature is not enough to get us through all the obstacles. We also need the blessings of fate to support us sufficiently until we can manage for ourselves, drawing increasingly upon the resilience that nature provides us. So we come equipped, but unlike some animals who are just kind of ready to rock and roll from day one, take care of themselves, we are dependent on fate. We are dependent on our families, our caregivers, those who surround us, to nurture us along until we are able to fend for ourselves. And many of us did not land in families that were ideally suited, shall we say, for taking on that task. People who had their own problems. And so that's the environment that many of us, at any rate, were born into. And yet the resilience is there, though we may have to dig a little deeper in order to find it. So, number 1, we become equipped by nature to survive, live our journey, and become. Become what? Become who we were meant to be. The Army, I think it was, took over that phrase. Kind of sad that they did it. Be all that you were meant to be. Come join the Army. Well, I don't know that method did it. Maybe it did for some. But it promised it. It promised it. And it capitalized on something that's innate. It was good marketing because there's something in our nature that is becoming. We are on a journey. We're not home yet. All right, so number 2. I can get carried away with this stuff. I got to watch it. Because of our powerlessness, and be careful of that word. This is not a 12-step book. Because of our powerlessness, we must adapt. And so we create, quote, stories, unquote, to help us understand. Among our management systems is our imagination. Life itself is a big, blooming profusion of stimuli, so immense that we can never understand or absorb it all. This particular animal, us, responds to the inherent traumas of life via the imagination. So one of the things we come along with is our imaginations. And we put that to work in both positive and exciting ways, and we can also have it work against us. We are meaning-seeking, meaning-creating animals. We seek meaning in our lives, in our situations. We try to make sense of it. And this is very natural to us. It's not intentional. It's just who we are, trying to seek meaning. Thus, we attempt to make sense of our experience, to understand the world in order to better survive in it. In doing so, we imagine fractal stories seeking to answer the questions of survival, partial stories. Who are we? What is this about? Is it safe or is it hostile? How can I live in the face of that? Our stories arise from trying to make sense of our life, to make it predictable, perhaps more manageable. Pay attention to that our lives have become unmanageable line. That thing is so important, There is in every human life an element of unmanageability. It's just who we are, that life is a mystery. And if we just try to control it and dominate it, we're going to miss it. And the beauty of 12-step is that we're not out to manage it. We're asking God, life, to manage it for us. A world of difference in those two stances. And it really makes all the difference in how we approach the 12-step journey. And of course, the stories are the product of the limits of our imaginal capacity as children. So we put our imaginations to work, but as kids, we're not equipped to do that. And so we're going to imagine all sorts of things that are wrong with us. All right? We're going to internalize the messages that we're receiving, in many cases from families and support systems that are not very supportive. Something wrong with me. All right? The wrong stories can turn us against ourselves. In time, we can outgrow many of these stories as we accumulate other experiences with a different slant. But the earliest stories persist and thread their way through our entire lives. Again, a line from Chapter 5, our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. What we used to be like. We need to go back to that time in our lives when the world was exciting and an adventure, and it was filled with mystery. All right? You see the sunrise, you see the sunset, and something glows inside of us. We play a game, and we're pirates, or we're playing with a doll, or whatever the game might be, and our imaginations take over, and we're living an exciting life, okay? Well, what happened? What happened to that excitement? What happened to that innocence and beauty and purity that every kid is? I mean, look in the eyes of a baby. Look at the face of a 3, 4, 5-year-old. And what do you see? You see innocence. You see excitement about life. Can't wait for the summer to come, to go to the beach. We run there, What happened to that? I think you're going to find in Jungian psychology that it's still in there, but we've got to go in search of it. All right? So what happened? What we're like now? Have we found that kid, rescued that kid, established a relationship with that kid? help that kid understand that some of the messages he or she received simply were not true. They weren't true. Not stupid, not fat, not ugly, not dumb, The messages that got internalized. But what he's saying is these messages could stay with us all of our lives unless we do our work. And that's what he's saying next. Number 3, we become servants of and prisoners to our, quote, stories. Given that our stories are efforts to interpret the world and make it more knowable and more manageable, we come to depend on them to carry us through ever-new situations. The good news rising from our stories is that our, quote, interpretive fiction, unquote, allows us to build on our knowledge, bind our days together, and have a reasonably coherent personality. We did the best we could. The bad news is that those same stories also impose the paradigm, the limited and limiting lens of the former onto the immediacy of the new. Thus we create patterns, whether intended or not, and we become prisoners of what we depend upon. Even when we find our choices and their subsequent patterns problematic, even destructive to us and others, we perpetuate them because they are familiar. Perhaps because at that hour, they are the only way we can see the world. This leads to the repetition compulsion, which over a lifetime dots our histories with stuck places, blockages, and replicative reenactments. We don't grow up. We don't grow out of. We stay stuck in our stories. Those stories have to change. They have to be enlarged upon. They have to be examined, and that's painful to go back and look at some of that stuff. But I think unless we do that, we're going to repeat them over and over and over again. Wilson was stuck. Wilson described himself as wanting to overcome his alcoholism, wanting to put it down, wanting to be with his family, wanting to be the man he was meant to be, and yet he was stuck. He couldn't break the chain. His best description was that he was chained to the back wall of a cave, saw his family standing there, encouraging him, begging him to come out, couldn't break free. Couldn't do it until his friend Ebby came and visited his cave, told him how he had escaped from his cave. And when he did that, Wilson began to believe, maybe it's possible for me. I think that's the hope of step 2, that we have to have if we're going to do this work, that maybe there's a good chance, or at least some chance, that this thing can work for me. Maybe it's all we got at the beginning. Hang on to that. Hang on to that. We're going to know a new freedom if we do these steps. But that comes after a number of the steps are done. It isn't just wishing is going to make it so, all right? So there's work involved. Hollis continues, it is, as I pointed out before, so hard for any of us to realize that we are not what happened to us. We are not what happened to us. What happened to us was an external manifestation by fate. But our story about that is uniquely ours. So if the child interprets the neglect as a statement about his or her worth, rather than see that the deficiency was really that of others, then we can expect either a lifetime of self-sabotage, unworthiness, and lack of permission, or a grandiose overcompensation. So we're either going to be nothing or we're going to be everything. We're going to give up on ourselves, or we're going to try to dominate people, and tackle life, but not as human beings. We're going to be so scarred by our early upbringing, undealt with, that it's going to manifest itself throughout our life. And this is the work. This is the work, the deep, deep work of recovery. And this is how I think depth psychology is such a critical element to the recovery process. So both of these are driven by a faulty narrative, either I'm the best or I'm the worst, around what a fated encounter ostensibly means. It was never about us. Boy, I've underlined that one 3 times. It was never about us. But it is our story. So we remain influenced, if not governed by it. We all have our stories. Some of them, much of them are made up. We got to go back and examine the ones that belonged really to other people and that we took upon ourselves. And we have to give those back to them because they're not ours. Much of our lives are governed by what logicians call the fallacy of overgeneralization. What appeared to be true then is imposed over and over on other situations, creating a provisional verification of the original interpretive fiction. We bought the lie, and now that lie gets repeated over and over and over again, unless it gets dealt with. While we sometimes outgrow these stories, most of them, those involving phenomenological encounters, emotional encounters, deeply encounters that stay with us, encounters between ourselves and others, these persist in our lives. These become the complexes, emotionally charged, stuck places within ourselves. An event comes along and it reminds me at some unconscious level, and I fall naturally into replaying the story, all right, over and over again. It gets repeated. We can see why then psychotherapy in later life involves working backward from the texture of our histories to identify the operative narratives, lifting them out and into consciousness, and challenging them with a larger frame of reference and enhanced resources than the child ever possessed. This is why inner child work, I think, is so important in later stages of recovery. The kid got wounded. I got to go back there and rescue that kid and tell him it wasn't his fault. It wasn't her fault. And that you're going to be there and protect that kid going forward. See, they got abandoned not only by their caregivers, they got abandoned by us too. And that's the primary relationship that has to be reestablished. Just like I got to establish that primary relationship with the divine within, all right? That voice of love that is speaking to me louder than the voice of criticism that I'm all too damn familiar with. I need to listen to that kid, let him or her tell me what it was like to be abandoned. And I got to assure them, just as God is coming to take care of me in recovery, I'm going to take care of him or her, and we're going to form a partnership. And as these healings, because that's what this chapter is about, as these healings come about, then I'm going to find an inner strength and a new story that is very, very much different from the one I'm ready to to leave behind. We can see why then psychotherapy in later life involves working backwards from the texture of our histories to identify the narratives, lifting them out and into consciousness and challenging them with a larger frame of reference and enhanced resources than the child ever possessed. Indeed, reflection, therapy, and insight allow us the critique of our stories. They begin to separate us from our history and restore a connection to the internal sources of guidance. Negative voices, I think, share from my story, started coming into my life to protect the kid. An indifference, I had a character of indifference. I don't care what you think, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to do life. I'm going to maybe look like I'm doing life, but there's a part of me that has come to protect me from the pains of life. And that was very necessary for a 6, 8, 10-year-old kid growing up in an alcoholic home. But if that gets repeated in my ongoing life, then I'm missing out on the joys, the new story that has to come to take its place if I do the work. Number 4, this is a fun one, I think, was for me. Without the gift of psychopathology, we would never be stunned into an awareness of the need for reconsideration and thereby perhaps transform to a larger story. Pay attention to this one. The tenor of modern life is deeply vested in the idea of management and control. Our vast armaments of tools, from computers to modern medicine to ever-expanding technologies, feed the fantasy of increasing control over our lives, even as other aspects of our lives slip more and more out of our control. We must always remember that the human ego consciousness, which takes onto itself vast presumptive powers, is rather a fragile wafer floating on a tenebrous sea, a dark, I had to look that word up, tenebrous sea, dark, shadowy, obscure, a wafer, our ego, a small bit of consciousness, back to that iceberg thing, with 70-80% of it under the waterline. That's the sea of unconsciousness. So this fragile little ego. I've recently heard the following ego rationalizations. This is what the puffed up ego says. I know what I think. No, you don't. 80% of the thinking is going on underground, underwater. I have no shadows. Oh, yes, we do. I wasn't myself yesterday when I acted out, when I did something really dumb that I'm ashamed of. I wasn't myself. Oh, yes, you were. I just wasn't a self that I was aware of. So that's why this work is so important. He adds a humorous one here, a sweatshirt that he had. It said, I know I am right. Don't you think I would know if I weren't? Every alcoholic should have one of those shirts in their closet. All of these assertions beg the question, what do I not know that is, in fact, running my life? A counselor I knew back in the day, he had an expression, who's driving the bus? What part of me from my old life has taken control of the wheel and is taking me in directions that I really don't want to go? See, that's the work of depth psychology, finding out who it is that's driving the bus, who it is that has, from the unconscious, come up out of the water or up out of the basement and assumed control of my life and taking it in directions that I don't want to go. It says, fortunately, we are reminded again that we are gifted by psychopathology. What a strange statement that is in the context of contemporary Western culture. How is psychopathology a gift? When we remember that the literal meaning of psychopathology is the expression of the suffering of the soul. Psyche is soul. Pathology is what's wrong with it. What's wrong with my soul? My soul is telling me what's wrong, letting me know there is something wrong, deeply wrong inside of me, and it needs to get my attention. And this is what he's calling the gift of psychopathology. It's the expression of the suffering of the soul. We then begin to get a clue as how this gift functions in our lives. Psychopathology, he goes on, is a gift because it gets our attention. Our symptoms get our attention. It tells us that the soul is not pleased with where our energies are going. It seeks corrections of course from the executive branch decisions, the ego, And the more we resist, the sharper the messages grow. The weight of our societal obligations is huge, and the power of our earliest stories of adaptation and conflict management is extraordinary. Hence, the power of the psyche's expression of dismay must grow apace. For us to simply medicate them away or rationalize them is to push the summons to alternative choices into a deeper hiding place. I mentioned this earlier in the series, but there was that time when I heard a voice in me, and it got my attention, where I was going to choose two places to go, neither of which was where I needed to be. And my soul spoke to me. It was the first time I really heard two-way prayer, I didn't know to write it down, but I never forgot it, never forgot the words it said to me, because I knew it wasn't me. It was a deeper part of me that had to grab my attention and say, wait a minute, you're going in the wrong direction. You need to change, and you need to change deeply. This is bottom for many of us. When something resonates so deeply inside of us that it grabs our attention. It's a summons of the soul to do what? To change. To listen to it instead of listening to the ego voice. Number 5. Psychopathology calls us to accountability, to something larger than palliative care. Speaking recently with a man whose entire life had been governed by the demands of a very narcissistic parent, he complained of his anger leaking out inappropriately in situation after situation. This leakage derives from the vast cellar of anger he carries at having been enslaved to the power techniques of that parent. It is easy enough to say, move away, act differently, and he has. But we also have to recognize how the early story of powerlessness before the demanding giant told him he was doomed to fruitless suffering. When we are kids, the giants in our lives have power beyond our understanding. And we carry that throughout much of our lives unless we do this work. I reminded him, the patient, that two functional definitions of depression are anger turned inward and learned helplessness. As a child, he got the indelible message that the giant other, with a capital O, was impermeable, devouring, and relentless. So he learned helplessness, and he turned his legitimate anger back upon himself. And catch this line: the only one he had permission to assail. The only one he had permission to assail. Boy, that line should grab you. The things we say to ourselves about ourselves. It's brutal, but we're the only ones. We can't speak up to them. Not when you're 4 or 5, perhaps. Or if you do, you get your mouth washed out with soap, so not really safe. Predictably, a history of depression and self-medication emerged as a byproduct for this patient. Sequels to a once accurate story, but a story long outgrown. The central theme that threads through the second half of our lives is accountability for whatever the first half produced. I'm going to read that one again. The central theme that threads through the second half of our lives is we're going to be held accountable for whatever the first half produced. We can be a victim of that first half and live an unlived life going forward, or we can begin to assume responsibility for the story we created that was distorted. But we have to go back and do the work. And he says, I use the term half of life in a psychological and not in a chronological sense. The second half can begin as one faces aging and mortality, or the death of a loved one, or 1,000 other moments when we step back and begin the radical reassessment of our lives. It can also begin when we begin recovery, and that can be at 14, 15, 16 years old. It's a new life that's coming into existence, and the same principles have got to be at play, I got to go back and do the work. The first half of our lives is pretty much a large but necessary mistake as we enter the world thinking we know who we are, what we want, and what is important to devote ourselves to. Some of those choices are quite appropriate and bring enduring meaning to us, such as caring for our children. Other choices are driven by our response to external pressure or our, quote, stories. And thus, we bumble into and through life. But somewhere along the way, the psyche keeps knocking on the floorboards of our flimsily constructed psychic dwelling and gets our attention. Remember the Christmas story, Ebenezer Scrooge? Not a nice character. And then the ghosts of Christmas past come knocking on the floorboards of his life. Things that he's guilty over, things that he hasn't done. He became who he didn't want to become. And that's the psyche, the soul, bringing its message to us that we need to change. Got to listen to it. Got to listen to it. In many ways, I think that's the voice. In two-way prayer, we look about listening to God. It's God, it's the soul, it's the inner guide. It's something in ourselves as we imagine it, right? That is course correcting us in a big sense in terms of moving in a very large new direction, like not drinking, not drugging, or going back to school or taking a job, big decisions, but in little ways as well. Is this enhancing who the soul is meant to be, who I am meant to be, or is it detracting from it? Got to watch these things carefully, keep an eye on them. As obvious as this encounter with ourselves seems, not everyone shows up for the appointment. Kierkegaard told of a man who was astonished to find his name in the obituary column of the morning newspaper, suggesting that he did not know he had died. Why? Because he did not know that he had lived either. So much of our life is on automatic pilot that we all risk waiting until the end to try to figure out what this life has really been about. On that note, I have noticed with my clients 70 and older the many, many dreams that survey their histories. In some cases, one might conclude that those distant events still contain residual energy, perhaps unfinished business. But I also think that the psyche is deliberately parading our life before us in order to get us to better see what the drivers have been, the operating stories, the remaining tasks of assimilation, self-forgiveness, and continuing vigilance. It might behoove us to awaken while we are still here, still writing our story on those remaining blank pages. Failure to do so consigns the sovereignty of our lives to our demanding histories. What profound sorrow must arise from this failure to be the bearer of being that seeks expression through us. What life asks of us, how we are to carry it forward, how we are to serve it, all this is left empty and discarded, as Rilke counseled the young poet. Everything is gestation, and then bringing forth, absorbing, just, swallowing, and then bringing it forth. He then quotes from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. This is such a beautiful line. That gospel says, this is Jesus speaking. If we bring forth what is within us, what we bring forth will serve us. And if we do not bring forth what is within us, what we do not bring forth will destroy us. Those are pretty harsh statements, Hollis says, but they are millennia old, and from someone before us who reached this same conclusion of accountability. I mean, lots of people are going to say, don't dive so deep, just stay on the surface of things. Well, if there's rotting material inside of me, if I go down and bring it forth, it will save me. If I just try to avoid it and let it continue to rot, it is going to destroy me. So that's the choice we have. That's why step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are so critical. They're removing the blockages to my soul, the things that have gotten in the way of my being the man or the woman that I was intended to be. Got to go in and do that inner work and then share that with another person. Hey, this is the story. This is what I was telling myself of who I was. And have another independent individual listen to that and say, hey, you're much like me. You're not the worst thing that ever crawled out from under a rock. You're a human being. Yeah? And I accept you just as you are. That's the gift of step 5. Another human being saying, you got your story wrong. You got it wrong. You're a beautiful person. Now, go live that life. Number 6. Our central tasks are recovery of permission, personal authority, and personal aspiration. The emergence of depth psychology comes as a response to the summons to personal accountability. One of the byproducts, the immense discrepancy between us as nascent beings, budding beings, emerging beings, young children beings, and that of parents, powers, and myriad principalities, is that we overlearn our essential powerlessness. We realize that our well-being depends in large measure both on the generosity of those entrusted to our caretaking and on our capacity to meet the conditions our fate brings to us. History is full of worthy souls who were crushed by the weight of slavery, abuse, racism, sexism, and other forms of denial of their soul's right to expression. Some of us got robbed of our childhoods. Sexual abuse certainly does that. Exposes us to things that the child is not in any way ready for. And those pains, those scars, they can last a lifetime. All right. We may only grieve their suffering and unlived possibilities, but we must be resolved to live whatever remains to us to the fullest. We are not victims. We're going to take responsibility for what we can do about these things, or not. We can just let them fester, and then wonder, why am I repeating these scripts over and over and over again? But the other side of this, guys, is that it makes recovery exciting. It's not recovery, it's discovery. Discovery of where I went off track, how I can get back on track, finding not only the negative voices within us, but the positive voices, the God voice, the voice of our ancestors who, want us to not make the mistakes that they made. The whole world, the mystery of it really begins to open up. It's more than slogans. To grasp those possibilities for fuller life expression, we need first to wrestle with this deeply implanted archaic hold that the old power discrepancy between the outer world and the inner world, to both of which we are obliged to report, still has on us. This shift of our center of gravity begins by asking less what happened to me than another question. This is key. What wants to enter the world through me? That might be the bearer of new life into this world, is the only antidote to the old world and its stories. Got to create a new story. And we're going to create that new story by listening to the God voice within that wants me to be honest, unselfish, loving, to be all the things that it intended, that nature, life intended for me to become. Assuming that we can ask that question and consider its implications, then we ascertain that we can no longer afford to live tentatively, as if this were our life. We can no longer ask permission to believe what we believe, desire what we desire. We have to seize permission. It is not given to us. It is an act born of insight, occasionally courage, sometimes desperation. Permission to accept our destiny is now a greater summons than the gravitas that fate weighs upon us. We were born, came into the world, grew up with all sorts of challenges, and life may have thrown a few more at us along the way. But always, there is enough inner resources that we can grab hold of to change those stories, to write new stories with the remainder of our lives. That's why we say in recovery, we get to live two lives. One that was determined by our past, kept us stuck in our caves, and a second life where we know a new freedom and a new happiness. We have to sort through the immense internal traffic we all experience in the information-jammed, invasive world in which we live. Which threads of narrative come from our old stories? And to address that question, We have to know something about the presence of those invisible agents in our daily life. Presences making decisions for us, frequently eating our lunch for us. Who are those voices within us? Those negative voices of self-hatred, of self-incrimination, of refusing to forgive ourselves. I think we know them pretty well. Further, we need to identify and begin a dialogue with those intimations that also come to us from the soul, the positive voices. We have many of them, but have lost track of them in the thicket of choices daily life demands. We are often intimidated. We must find the courage to live them in the world with all the consequences that they may bring. Those moments of decision and commitment are both terrifying and exhilarating. We stood at the turning point. We also have to recover the dreams and imaginings we left behind. Because of changes in the body and because of time's closed doors, we can't recover all of them, but many, in some form or another, are within reach still. If only we had permission. At this point in life's journey, surely we can ask ourselves, what am I waiting for? Do I think my parents are going to show up on my doorstep and push and punish me? Do I think the loss of approval from others will forever sabotage me? Do I think it will still be too much for me to take on, the overwhelming thing? What fears, what old narratives, what? Is it not time to set them aside before they write the final chapters as they have written the previous ones? You know, we have a choice, guys. We have a choice every day. We have a choice to even start our day over if it got off on the wrong track. Right? That's freedom. You know, that's if I got knocked down 8 times, it's in that 9th time of getting up. The real changes are probably going to start happening. Recovering our interests and aspirations, valuing them, is surely the best hope we have for recovering that sense of wonder, curiosity, joy, and fulfillment we occasionally grasped as children. Our nature is there to serve and support us in those hours of decisive commitment to grow, to change. What are we waiting for? Elvis to show up and say, yes, you can have your life now. Reportedly, he left the building some time ago. Number 7, the final point in his projects, all right, the principles that we have to learn. The project of growing up is to keep working to heal the splits within until we serve what is wishing to enter the world through us in the first place. You know, in step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Well, truth is we don't understand God, but on a daily basis, we get to experience God, all right? As more and more we turn over to that image, what our lives are meant to be about, as we serve love, as we serve honesty and integrity through our own lives. That's the work of recovery. He says, it is not the role of the ego to choose those aspirations. They are chosen for us by our natures or by the divinities. There's the God piece. Whichever story makes more sense to you. It falls to the ego to decide what to do about these things. The splits we carry are debilitating. Well, let me go back to that one. We do need an ego. You're not going to get rid of the ego. The ego has a voice in this thing. Is it going to do the work? Is it going to read? Is it going to pray? Is it going to act? Is it going to watch? Or is it not? That's our choice. But that's the limit of its choice. Then I have to go and recognize that there's another authority within me that's deeper than the ego, all right? That's deeper than the ego. Which one am I going to serve? The splits we carry are debilitating, painful, regressive, and they have the power to immobilize us or direct us in all sorts of take care of ourselves efforts, just palliative, it calls it, efforts. They don't treat the source. They don't go down to the root cause. Yet something within us always knows what is right for us. And its insistence on expression is what keeps us awake at night, nudges from within amidst our busiest hours, or causes us to envy others for what we see in their life that we have not brought into our own. If we are truly living our life to the best we can, risking the things that matter most to us, the lives of others will never be a distraction or source of envy. Neither will we be preoccupied by self-doubt. We will be too busy taking care of our business to be distracted by such deflections. Healing is the act of nature. But we can assist that process by respecting what wishes expression through us, even if the world around us does not. Do not think, as we often did as children, that if we are outvoted by that noisy world, then we are wrong. We are simply outvoted. Throughout the world, crazed and crazy people clamor for our attention, for our votes, for our spiritual allegiance. If we are ever going to be true to our own voice, it has to be now, while there is still time. If healing is an act of supportive nature, vocation is a summons of the soul. What larger picture, what unrealized possibilities are destroyed when we do not embody that which wishes expression through us? As a Near Eastern sage once wrote, "It is as if we were sent to this land with a royal assignment, and if we have only dithered about and forgotten our task, then we have violated our reason for being here." Each of us must remember that we were sent with the gift of our personhood, and if we fail to embody that in the world, we have failed our mission. At the end of life, we're going to be asked, did you become yourself? Not did you become somebody else. Did you become as fully yourself as you were capable of becoming? That's the question. You can answer yes to that one. Boy, you're home free. Really free. Whatever the impediments life brings, social, physical, mental, spiritual, the soul is forever seeking to work its way through all barriers, not unlike that blade of grass that emerges from the concrete imposed upon it. The work of healing begins by attending to the soul's desire for expression. Recall that the word psychotherapy means to listen to or to attend the soul. Thus, the work we do to attend the soul's intent is called healing. This summons for accountability, for our own healing, has long been recognized. One especially plangent voice, reverberating voice, loud voice, I had to look that one up too. One especially plangent voice expressing such desire for healing comes again from the 19th century poet Matthew Arnold in a poem aptly titled "The Buried Life." I'll read a section. But often in the world's most crowded streets, but often in the din of strife, there rises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life, a thirst to spend our fire and restless force in tracking out our true original course, a longing to inquire into the mystery of this heart which beats so wild, so deep in us, to know whence our lives come and where they go. Use poetry in your morning quiet time and meditation. Read some of Matthew Arnold. Read some of Rilke. Read the people who did the work, who went inside, who found the fire that is within each and every one of us, okay? The buried life, he says, is buried, but still alive. It remains to us to risk pulling it up into realms of consciousness and lived experience. We did not have much say over how and why we got so separated from ourselves, but we certainly do have some say about how we bring ourselves back together again. So that's the work of the second half of life. I think that's the real work of recovery, to become the women and the men that God intended for us to be, but we got diverted. We bought into the lies that we told ourselves as children. And now it's time to grow up. It's time to grow up. And Wilson, he started by not drinking, but then, he had to do some in-depth therapy. Saw 2 therapists later in life to deal with the depression, to deal with some of the other addictions that were still plaguing him. That's the work we've got to do. Not drinking, not drugging. That's the beginning, but it's only the beginning if we'll learn to go deep. So hope this was helpful. Hope you were able to gain something from it. Again, the book is Living Between Worlds, Finding Personal Resilience in Changing Times. Hope you enjoyed it. God bless, and keep coming back.